This tutorial is produced by the Mecklenburg County Clerk of Superior Court, Estates Division. While our office cannot provide legal advice, we are happy to help you navigate the estates administration process. This tutorial will provide a step-by-step guide to completing Form AOC-E-432, the application for administration by clerk. First, let's define some of the terms used in this tutorial with which you may not be familiar. Decedent, a person who has died. Applicant or petitioner, the person who is applying for reimbursement of funeral, cremation, or burial expenses paid for the decedent. Heir, a person who is able to inherit from a decedent's estate when no will has been probated. When is this process used? After a decedent's death, a person may make application to the clerk's office to have the clerk of court collect monetary assets left in the decedent's name, up to $5,000, and use these funds to reimburse any person who paid funeral, cremation, or burial expenses of the decedent, or to pay an unpaid balance owed towards these expenses. A maximum of $3,500 may be paid for the funeral or cremation, and an additional payment of up to $1,500 may be made for burial expenses. The administration by clerk process is appropriate in the following circumstances. A decedent died without a will and no administrator has qualified to administer the estate, or a decedent died with a will but the estate is so small that it does not justify the expense of probate and administration, and the decedent has monetary assets only, and the value of these assets does not exceed $5,000. What are the limitations on using this process? This procedure is not available under the following circumstances. It has been less than 12 months from the date of death, and there is a surviving spouse who has not waived a year's allowance. It has been less than 12 months from the date of death, and there is a surviving minor child, a child less than 22 years of age who is a full-time student, or a mentally incompetent or mentally disabled child under the age of 21. The estate's value exceeds $5,000. The decedent has assets that are not monetary in nature. The administration by clerk cannot be used if the decedent had a pre-need funeral plan or prepaid for their own funeral expenses. Any person may fill out this form. However, only an individual who paid or the beneficiary of a life insurance policy used to pay the funeral, cremation, or burial expenses of the decedent will be reimbursed from the decedent's assets. What must the applicant provide to the clerk's office when seeking administration by clerk? In addition to the completed application for administration by clerk, the decedent's death certificate must also be provided. Since this process may be used only for monetary assets valued at $5,000 or less, the applicant must provide proof of the decedent's assets, such as a recent bank account statement, check payable to the decedent, or other documentation showing monetary assets belonging to the decedent. An applicant must also provide a current invoice for the decedent's funeral or cremation and burial expenses. If these expenses have not been paid in full, any available assets will be applied towards the unpaid balance before any person is reimbursed for his or her payment. So that reimbursement may be paid in the appropriate amount, the invoice must provide the name of any person who contributed towards the payment of these expenses. If an insurance policy covered the payment of the decedent's expenses, documentation will be needed to identify the beneficiary of the policy. The clerk's office also requires a family history affidavit to verify that the decedent's heirs are listed correctly on the application. There is a separate tutorial to help you complete this form. The General Court of Justice fee for processing the application is $20. Acceptable forms of payment include cash, certified check, credit or debit cards, and money order. How to complete the application for administration by clerk. Enter the county where this form will be filed. Enter the decedent's name and date of death. In the next box, check yes if the decedent left a will. If the decedent did not leave a will, check no. Enter the county where the decedent lived at the time of death. Enter your name and complete address as the applicant. Provide your relationship to the decedent and your telephone number. Check the appropriate box for the decedent's marital status at the time of death and indicate whether a year's allowance to a spouse or eligible child has been allotted. If the decedent was married, enter the surviving spouse's name and address. Determine the decedent's heirs and list their names, ages, relationship to the decedent, and addresses. If an heir's exact age is not known, print an A for adult or M for minor in the age column. Under Assets, list each bank account and uncashed check in the decedent's name and the value of each. Place the total for these items in the bottom right box. Please note that the total cannot exceed $5,000. Turn the form over or move to the second page. Print the name and address of the funeral home, including the telephone number. Enter the total funeral expenses billed and total amount paid. This information should be accessible on the paid funeral home bill. If an unpaid balance remains, enter the balance due. List the name and address for and amount paid by each person who paid any part of the decedent's funeral expenses. The total from this section should equal the total amount paid entered above. List the name and address of and amount owed to any other known creditors of the decedent. When the form is completed, the applicant must sign the form. Do not sign until your signature can be witnessed by a person authorized to administer oaths. This will typically be a licensed notary public. Submit the completed, signed, and notarized form with these items: death certificate, printed proof of decedent's monetary assets, funeral or cremation and burial bill, which identifies all parties who contributed towards the payment, the family history affidavit, a cashier's check or money order for $20 payable to Clerk of Superior Court. If the form is approved, the clerk's office will complete a payment authorization, which allows banks or businesses to issue payment to the clerk of court of any monetary assets left in the decedent's name. Once payment is received by the clerk's office, payment will be made, first towards any unpaid portion of the funeral, cremation, or burial bill, then to persons who paid any of these expenses for the decedent. The clerk will issue payment proportionally to each person, up to the amount received from the decedent's assets, the total expenses paid, or the amount allowed by law, whichever is less. After preparing your paperwork in accordance with this tutorial, you may bring your documents and the filing fee to the Mecklenburg County Courthouse and drop them off, or you may mail these items to the following address: Clerk of Superior Court, Estates Division, P.O. Box 37971, Charlotte, North Carolina 28237. I hope this information has been helpful. We look forward to assisting you.